My name is Rose, and if you're listening to this, let me warn you. Sometimes the cruelest betrayals don't come from strangers, but from the people who share your blood. Before I dive into my story, I want to know, where are you watching from today? And as you listen, let me know in the comments how this story makes you feel or if you've ever experienced something similar. Your thoughts mean a lot to me, and I'd love to hear your perspective. Ever since I can remember, my younger sister Lydia had a way of stealing the spotlight. Not because she earned it, not because she was exceptionally talented or hardworking, but because she was, well, Lydia. The baby of the family. The spoiled one. The girl who could throw a tantrum, cry at the right time, or smile sweetly, and somehow the whole household would bend around her desires. I was the elder daughter, the responsible one, the achiever. Our parents expected me to be strong, self-sufficient, and disciplined. And I was. I studied hard, worked long nights, and chased a dream that consumed me for years, becoming a doctor. I achieved it. While Lydia played at being the charming little sister, I built something solid. But in the process, I learned what it meant to be invisible in your own home. When I got an award in medical school, the family clapped politely. But when Lydia got hired as a junior teller at the bank, they treated it like she had just won the Nobel Prize. When I told them about my first published research, they said, "That's nice, Rose." But when Lydia posted selfies in a new dress, everyone gushed about how pretty she looked. It was always that way. I was the backbone, she was the glitter. And though I tried not to care, deep down I knew, Lydia resented me. She couldn't stand that behind her carefully polished charm, she was ordinary, while I was building a life that mattered. That resentment simmered in her eyes when I walked into the room wearing my white coat, when people looked at me with respect, when our aunts whispered, "Rose will make this family proud." Lydia hated it. She wanted that pride for herself. The truth is, I had learned to live with her envy. I had been there since childhood. What I never imagined was how far it would one day take her. It all began the night I brought David to meet my family. David was everything I thought I had ever wanted. Tall, confident, a CEO of a growing company, and dazzling in the way he could command attention without even trying. We had been dating for almost a year, and though he had his flaws, his flirtatious nature, his love for being admired, I convinced myself it was harmless. He chose me after all. That evening I dressed carefully, my heart pounding. For once I thought I would get to be the one who turned heads at the dinner table. Not because of my degrees or my work, but because of love. I wanted my family to see that I wasn't just the responsible doctor, the one who carried the weight. They would see I was cherished too. We walked into the dining room together. My parents' eyes lit up with curiosity. My grandmother clasped her hands together, whispering, "Finally, Rose." And for the first time in a long while I felt seen. But then I saw Lydia. She sat across the table in her bright red dress, her lips painted into a smirk that only widened when her eyes landed on David. I know my sister too well. I saw the flicker of calculation in her gaze, like a hunter spotting prey. During dinner, she laughed at all of David's jokes a little too loudly. She leaned forward, her hand brushing his arm under the guise of passing the salt. At one point she asked him endless questions about his company, her eyes sparkling with a kind of fascination that made me clench my jaw. David, to his credit or maybe his shame, seemed amused. He enjoyed attention, and Lydia was pouring it on like honey. I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. But deep down, a cold stone settled in my stomach. I knew that look in Lydia's eyes. I had seen it when I got my first car, when I got accepted into med school, when I moved into my own apartment. It was the look that said, "If you have it, I want it. And I'll do anything to take it." That night, after David and I left, Lydia texted me. "He's handsome, Rose. Almost too handsome for you. Don't let him slip away." On the surface, it looked like a sisterly tease. But I knew better. It was a warning. She had set her sights on him. And here's the cruel irony. My parents brushed it off. They always brushed Lydia off. "That's just how she is," they'd say. "Don't take her too seriously." But I did take her seriously. Because I knew what she was capable of when jealousy burned in her veins. At the time, though, I couldn't have predicted the storm that was coming. I couldn't have known that in just a few short months, my sister would cross the line I thought no sister could ever cross. And when she did, she wouldn't just break my heart. She would shatter my trust, my faith in family, and the life I thought I was building. This was only the beginning. They say betrayal never happens in one moment. It begins as a shadow, small, unnoticed. until one day it consumes everything. That's how it started with Lydia and David. At first it was little things. A text message Lydia would send me late at night, written in her sweet but poisonous tone. "Does David always work this late? Don't you ever get lonely?" Or, "You're lucky, Rose. A CEO like him must be expensive to keep happy." She never said it outright, but her words carried daggers. Always planting doubts. Always probing for weaknesses. And then she changed her strategy. Instead of going through me, she went directly to David. It began with what she called a small favor. One afternoon, David told me he had to meet Lydia for coffee. "She said it's about the bank," he explained casually. "Something to do with loans, I think." She insisted I was the only one who could advise her. I laughed it off. Lydia was a bank teller. What kind of advice could she need from a CEO? But David, generous to a fault, or perhaps proud of his own importance, agreed to meet her. When I asked Lydia about it later, she waved it off. "Oh, Rose, don't be so serious. I just wanted some career advice. Isn't that what family is for?" But something inside me twisted. Because I knew Lydia. She didn't want advice, she wanted an opportunity. The coffee meetings became more frequent. First once. Then twice. Then every week. David mentioned them casually as if they were nothing. "Your sister's funny," he'd say. "She has a sharp wit." Or, "She says you're always so focused on work. She thinks I must get bored sometimes." I froze the first time he said that. He said what? "She was joking," David added quickly. "Don't worry." But the seed had been planted. And it wasn't me who doubted David. It was David who began doubting me, because Lydia was feeding him poison drop by drop. One evening, I overheard them talking in the hallway during a family gathering. Lydia's voice, soft and sympathetic. "David, you deserve someone who can actually give you time. Rose is always at the hospital. She loves her job more than anything. Don't you feel second place?" His low chuckle followed. "She does work a lot." I felt my heart stop. It wasn't just flirtation anymore. It was corrosion. Of my character, of my love, of the bond one thought was unshakable. The moment that confirmed my worst fears happened 3 months later. David canceled dinner with me one evening, claiming a work emergency. I didn't believe him, so after my shift I drove past his office. His car wasn't there. Something compelled me to keep driving, and I ended up outside a cafe downtown. And there they were. Through the window I saw Lydia leaning across the table, her hand covering his. She laughed, tilting her head in that way she always did when she wanted someone to feel like the center of the universe. And David, my David, looked back at her with an expression I had once believed was mine alone. My stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in my car gripping the wheel, cold sweat trickling down my back. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just harmless, that David loved me and nothing could change that. But deep down I knew. Lydia was tightening her trap. Days turned into weeks. I noticed little shifts. David became distant, distracted. He smiled at his phone more than at me. When I asked who he was texting, he said, "Just work stuff." But one night as he stepped into the shower, his phone lit up on the nightstand. The message preview froze my blood. It was from Lydia. "I can't wait to see you again. Don't let her suspect." My knees buckled. My vision blurred. I dropped the phone, trembling. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't crazy. My own sister was trying to steal the man I loved. And yet, I stayed silent. Why? Because I wanted to believe it wasn't real. Because admitting it meant accepting the nightmare. And because a part of me still clung to the hope that David would choose me. But Lydia? She wasn't hoping. She was plotting. And soon she would make her boldest move yet. A move so cruel, so deliberate, that it would change the course of my life forever. The night of my engagement was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. Instead, it became the night everything collapsed. The night I discovered just how deep betrayal could run. I remember waking up that morning with my chest tight, the kind of weight you can't explain to anyone else. Everyone thought it was nerves, the usual bridal jitters before a big day. But I knew better. I had been carrying a storm inside me for weeks, ever since I had found those messages between David and Lydia. Ever since I caught glimpses of them together when they thought I wasn't looking. And yet I hadn't confronted them. Not directly. Maybe I was still clinging to hope that I was wrong, that David would never cross the line, that Lydia was just being her manipulative, jealous self. Maybe part of me wanted to protect the dream I had been building, because once I tore it down there would be no going back. I told myself, tonight I'll know. Tonight the truth will be clear. The house buzzed with activity as relatives arrived, decorations shimmered and laughter filled the rooms. My mother hugged me saying, "You look radiant, Rose." I smiled, but it was the kind of smile that hides pain. David arrived later, dressed sharply, his confident grin in place. He greeted the guests, shook hands, charmed everyone. For a moment I allowed myself to believe it might be okay. That I had imagined it all. That tonight would truly be ours. Then I saw it. Around Lydia's neck. The necklace. 3 days before I had seen a small velvet box in David's car. I hadn't opened it, but I had traced the delicate gold chain inside and assumed it was for me. A surprise he would give me on our engagement night. Now it gleamed on Lydia's collarbone, catching the light of the chandelier as if mocking me. My blood ran cold. Lydia smiled across the room, touching the necklace with her fingers, almost as if she was daring me to notice. And in that instant I understood. The gift meant for me was already hers. I couldn't breathe. The air seemed heavy, pressing down on me. I slipped away from the crowd, my legs moving on their own, until I found myself in the back corridor of the banquet hall. That's when I heard them. David's voice, low and hesitant. "We shouldn't be doing this tonight. It's her engagement." Lydia's laugh, soft and poisonous. "Don't act guilty. She doesn't love you like I do. You know it. She only cares about her career, her hospital, her patients. When was the last time she made you feel like a man? When was the last time she looked at you the way I do?" I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so loudly I thought they might hear it. David sighed. "Lydia." And then, the words that shattered me completely. "We'll figure it out after tonight. She'll have her perfect little party and then she'll go back to her busy life. But you'll know deep down that it's me you belong to." I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. My vision blurred with tears, my entire body trembling. I stumbled back into the hall, but no one noticed my state. The music played, people laughed, glasses clinked. To everyone else it was just another celebration. To me it was the funeral of my trust, the death of the life I had planned. The ceremony began. The host invited me and David to the stage and the applause rose like a tidal wave. I stood there under the spotlight, my hands shaking, my heart broken. David stood beside me, smiling for the cameras, while Lydia smirked in the crowd like the devil she was. And then something inside me shifted. A strange calm washed over me. I realized that if they wanted to humiliate me, if they wanted to destroy me, I would not go quietly. No. I would not let them whisper their betrayal behind my back while I played the fool. If they wanted war, I would give it to them. The microphone was handed to me. I took a deep breath, forcing my lips into a smile. "Tonight," I began, my voice steady, "is one of the most important nights of my life. And I'd like to take a moment to thank 2 very special people." The audience fell silent, waiting. I turned my gaze toward Lydia and David, both of whom froze under my stare. "These 2, I continued, "have taught me the most valuable lesson I could ever learn. They've shown me what love is and what it isn't. They've shown me that sometimes the people closest to you will stab you deepest." Gasps rippled through the crowd. David's smile faltered. Lydia's smirk disappeared. I lifted my hand, pointing directly at them. "My fiancé and my sister," I said, my voice ringing with icy clarity. "The 2 people I trusted most. Betraying me together." The room erupted. Shouts, whispers, gasps. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My grandmother started crying. Guests turned in shock, all eyes on Lydia, who sat frozen, her face pale as a sheet. David stammered, trying to deny it, but the necklace glinting on Lydia's neck betrayed him louder than any words ever could. I slid the engagement ring from my finger and dropped it on the stage. The tiny metallic sound echoed like thunder in the silence that followed. "This party is over," I said. And then I walked away. I didn't look back at David or Lydia, or the wreckage of my family's whispers. I didn't stop when my mother called my name, when my father tried to follow. I didn't pause to explain, to beg, to cry. I walked straight out of that hall into the cold night air and breathed for the first time in months. That night I packed my bags. I left the city, left my family, left the ruins of the life I thought I wanted. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew one thing: I could never go back. Not after what I had seen. Not after what they had done. And as the train carried me away the next morning, I stared out the window, tears streaming down my face, and whispered to myself, let them have each other. They deserve each other. But me? I'll build something better. I'll rise from this. I didn't know it then, but that night was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. When I left that night, dragging my suitcase through the dark streets, I felt like a ghost. Everything that had once defined me, my family, my relationship, my sense of belonging, was gone. Betrayal has a way of stripping you bare, leaving nothing but raw skin where your heart used to. I moved to another city, one where no one knew my name, where no one whispered about scandals or betrayals. I rented a small apartment close to the hospital where I was fortunate enough to get a new position. It wasn't glamorous, not at first, but it was mine. Every morning I buried myself in work. Medicine had always been my anchor, the one thing that made sense when everything else fell apart. I worked long hours, pouring all my pain into my patients, my research, the steady rhythm of hospital life. On the outside low. Nights were the hardest. I would sit by the window staring at the lights of the city, and wonder if Lydia and David were laughing together somewhere. Sometimes I imagined them sitting in a fancy restaurant, Lydia showing off that necklace, David holding her hand the way he once held mine. The thought made my chest ache, but I refused to let it consume me. Let them have each other, I whispered to myself. They deserve each other's emptiness. A year passed. Slowly the sharp edge of pain dulled. I wasn't healed, not completely, but I was stronger. I learned to live with the silence, to find joy in small things. The smile of a child I treated, the thank you notes from grateful families, the way the sun hit my apartment in the morning. Then one afternoon, fate decided to surprise me. I had gone to the bank to handle some paperwork for a mortgage I was considering. I was exhausted from a night shift, barely paying attention as I handed my documents to the teller. But then I heard a warm, deep voice behind me. Excuse me, are you Dr. Rose? I turned. A man in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed yet approachable, stood there with a kind smile. His presence radiated authority, but not in the arrogant way David once did. This man's confidence was quieter, steadier, like an oak tree rather than a wildfire. Yes, I said cautiously. Do I know you? I'm Mark, he said, extending his hand. I own this bank. One of my employees mentioned you were here. I just wanted to thank you personally. You treated my niece last month. She couldn't stop talking about you. You saved her life. For a moment I was speechless. It wasn't unusual for patients' families to thank me, but something about Mark's sincerity caught me off guard. His gratitude wasn't performative, it was real. We ended up talking longer than I expected. About medicine, about business, about life. He listened when I spoke, not just waiting for his turn but genuinely absorbing my words. And when he smiled, it wasn't the charming smirk of a man trying to impress. It was the smile of someone who saw you and valued you. Over the next few months we crossed paths again. Sometimes by chance, sometimes by quiet intention. He would invite me for coffee after I finished my rounds. I would find myself laughing at his dry humor, something I hadn't done in what felt like years. One evening as we walked through the park, he stopped and said, "You've been hurt, haven't you?" I froze. "What makes you say that?" He looked at me gently. "Because you look like someone who built walls to protect herself. Strong walls. But even behind them your eyes still carry pain." For a moment I wanted to deny it, to brush it off. But something about his honesty disarmed me. So I nodded. "Yes. I've been hurt. By people I should have been able to trust." He didn't press for details. He just said, "Then let me earn that trust back. Slowly. Patiently. I'm not in a rush." It was in that moment that something shifted inside me. Mark wasn't David. He wasn't a man who needed constant admiration, who could be swayed by whispers and charm. He was steady, grounded, real. And for the first time since my world had collapsed, I allowed myself to hope. Our relationship blossomed, not with fireworks but with steady warmth. He respected my work, celebrated my achievements without jealousy, and never once made me feel too much or not enough. With him I could be both Dr. Rose and simply Rose, the woman behind the title, the one who had been broken but was learning to heal. When he proposed, it wasn't in some grand display. He simply took my hand one quiet evening, looked me in the eye and said, "Rose, I want to spend the rest of my life protecting your heart, not breaking it. Will you let me?" And for the first time in years, My answer was an unshakable, joyful yes. We married quietly, surrounded by a few close friends. No elaborate halls, no flashing cameras, no glittering necklaces meant to dazzle. Just two people choosing each other wholeheartedly. I looked at him as we exchanged vows and thought, this is what love should have been all along. Lydia had stolen my fiancé once, but she hadn't stolen my future. Because my future was standing in front of me, holding my hand, promising me a kind of love that couldn't be shaken by envy or betrayal. And yet, even in my happiness, there was a ghost that lingered. I hadn't seen Lydia or David since that night. I didn't know if they were still together, if they were happy, if their betrayal had blossomed into something lasting. I told myself it didn't matter. That part of my life was dead and buried. But life has a cruel sense of irony. Because 5 years later I would walk back into my family's house for a Christmas dinner, and see them both again. And on that night Lydia would realize just how much she had lost. 5 years passed like a strange blur. If you had told me back then that I would build a new life, find someone like Mark and actually be happy again, I wouldn't have believed you. Yet here I was, married, respected in my career, and loved in a way I had once thought impossible. For a long time I avoided my family. The memories of that engagement night were too raw, too poisonous. But as the years rolled by, the phone calls from my mother grew harder to ignore. "Rose," she would say softly, "it's been so long. We miss you. Please just come for Christmas. The whole family will be there. One dinner, that's all I'm asking." At first I resisted. What would be the point? To sit across from the sister who betrayed me? To pretend nothing happened? But then Mark, ever patient, took my hand and said, "Maybe it's time. Not for them but for you." Sometimes closure doesn't come from avoiding the past but from facing it. And so, reluctantly, I agreed. The night of the dinner, snow fell gently outside, coating the streets in a soft white glow. I wore a deep green dress Mark had chosen for me, elegant but understated. I wanted to walk into that house not as the broken girl who had fled years ago, but as the woman I had become. When we arrived, my mother nearly cried with relief. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "I knew you'd come back." But the moment I stepped into the dining room, my heart clenched. There she was, Lydia. She looked older, of course. The years had dulled her glow, but her smirk remained the same. And beside her, as if time had frozen, was David. They were still together. My chest tightened, not out of longing but out of disbelief. After everything, after the humiliation, the secrecy, the scandal, they were still clinging to each other. Lydia's eyes landed on me, scanning me up and down. Then her lips curved into that familiar, poisonous smile. "Well, well," she said loudly enough for the table to hear. "Look who finally decided to show up. Still alone, I see." The words cut through the air like knives. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Lydia had always known how to control a room with her cruelty. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I simply smiled. A quiet, confident smile that said, "You have no idea." Dinner was served. The table sparkled with candles and fine china, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filling the air. On the surface, it looked like any other Christmas gathering. But underneath, tension rippled like an undercurrent ready to drag us all under. Lydia never stopped. She peppered the evening with subtle jabs. "Rose, do you still bury yourself in work? Poor thing. That must be why you never found anyone." Or, "Remember when David used to complain you never had time for him? Some things never change." David shifted uncomfortably each time she spoke, but he never defended me. Some things never change indeed. I sipped my wine and kept my composure, my smile never wavering. Because I knew something Lydia didn't. Halfway through dinner, just as she leaned back with that smug grin plastered on her face, the door opened. And there he was. Mark. Tall, composed, and striking in his dark suit, his presence filled the room the moment he stepped inside. My family fell silent. My father rose instinctively, as did my uncles. Even my grandfather, who rarely showed respect to anyone, nodded approvingly. "Sorry I'm late," Mark said warmly, his eyes finding mine. "Work ran over." Then he leaned down, kissed my cheek, and settled into the seat beside me. His hand slid over mine, firm and protective, a gesture so simple yet so profound. Lydia's face drained of color. Her eyes widened, her lips parting as if she'd just seen a ghost. "This is my husband," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the silence. Mark. Whispers erupted around the table. My mother's eyes shone with tears. My grandfather actually smiled. And Lydia. Lydia looked like the ground had just been ripped from under her feet. For the rest of the dinner, she sat in stunned silence, her fork clinking against her plate as she fumbled. Her confidence was gone, her poison evaporated. She had spent years mocking me for being alone, delighting in the belief that she had stolen my happiness. And now, with one entrance, Mark had shattered her illusion. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My silence spoke louder than words. Because in that moment, Lydia finally realized the truth. She had won nothing. And worse, she had lost everything. The rest of the Christmas dinner felt like a strange dream. Mark's presence shifted the entire atmosphere of the room. My relatives, who once pitied me, now looked at me with something new in their eyes: respect. For the first time in years, I wasn't the daughter who had been humiliated, the sister who had been betrayed. I was Rose, the woman who had built her life back from ashes, who had returned stronger than ever. But Lydia, she couldn't accept it. She sat across from me, her fork scraping her plate as she tried to force a smile. But the cracks showed. Her hand trembled slightly when she lifted her glass. Her laughter, too loud, rang hollow. David sat beside her, slouched, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His once confident grin had faded into the weary expression of a man who knew he had chained himself to the wrong person. "Quite the surprise," Lydia said finally, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I had no idea you'd married up." Her words hung heavy. Everyone at the table stiffened. My mother tried to interject. "Lydia, don't." But Lydia pressed on. "Funny, isn't it?" she continued, eyes locked on me. "You always pretended you didn't care about appearances, Rose. But look at you now. A wealthy husband. The perfect picture. I guess some things never change. You always need to prove you're better than me." Her tone cut like knives. My hands clenched under the table, but before I could speak, Mark placed his hand over mine. A quiet strength radiated from him. He didn't need to argue. He didn't need to defend. His very presence was enough. But Lydia wasn't done. She leaned closer, her voice sharp. "Tell me, Rose. Does he know? Does he know how cold you can be? How you bury yourself in work? How you—" Enough. The voice didn't come from me. It came from the end of the table. My grandfather, who had been silent all evening, slammed his fist onto the wood. His eyes, sharp even with age, burned into Lydia. 5 years, Lydia. 5 years since you destroyed your sister's engagement. 5 years since you humiliated this family with your shamelessness. And yet here you sit, still bitter, still spiteful. Enough. The room fell silent. Lydia's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. My grandfather leaned forward, his voice steady and cold. "If you cannot sit at this table with respect, then leave. Take that pathetic man with you." His gaze flicked to David, who looked down in shame. Gasps filled the room. My mother buried her face in her hands. My father closed his eyes, as though the truth he had avoided for years was finally undeniable. Lydia's face twisted, fury overtaking her shock. "You always loved her more," she spat, her voice shaking. "You all think she's so perfect, don't you? But she's not. She's not." David muttered, "Lydia, stop." But she turned on him like a snake. "Don't you dare tell me what to do. You were supposed to be mine. You promised me." Her voice cracked. She pushed back her chair, the legs screeching against the floor. David followed reluctantly, his face red with humiliation. They stormed out, Lydia's shrill voice echoing through the hall as the door slammed behind them. And just like that, the storm was gone. The room sat in stunned silence. I felt every pair of eyes on me, waiting for me to speak. But I didn't need to. For once, the truth had spoken for itself. Mark squeezed my hand, steady and reassuring. I looked around the table, at my parents' regretful faces, at my grandfather's proud nod, and finally at my mother's tear-streaked eyes. She whispered, "Rose, I'm sorry. I didn't answer right away. I had carried that wound for years, the silence of my family as Lydia's betrayal unfolded, the way they had turned a blind eye to her cruelty. But in that moment I realized something. I no longer needed their apologies to heal. I had already healed. So I smiled gently and said, "It's all right, Mother. Some things, time teaches us better than words ever could." That night, as Mark and I drove home through the snowy streets, I looked out the window at the lights twinkling in the distance. My heart, once shattered, felt whole again. Lydia had tried to break me. She had stolen my fiancé, poisoned my family, and mocked me for years. But in the end she had nothing. No ring. No stability. No respect. Me. I had everything. Not because of wealth or appearances or revenge shouted in public. But because I had found love. The kind of love that strengthens, not weakens. The kind that builds, not destroys. As we pulled into our driveway, Mark turned to me and said softly, "You handled yourself with such grace tonight. I'm proud of you." I leaned against him, whispering, "For the first time in years I feel free." And I did. Because my sister might have stolen my fiancé once, but she could never steal my future. Would you have let Lydia's bitterness explode like that? Or would you have confronted her yourself? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of betrayal, justice, and finding strength after heartbreak.